Something was stealing from Cole Anderson's hydroponics bay, and it was starting to get personal. In the desolate expanse of the Viridian frontier, a man's food was his life. For weeks, meticulously rationed protein bars and nutrient paste packs vanished in the dead of night. At first, he blamed the sand rats or the six-legged Viridian foxes, but the tracks were wrong. The security seal on the bay door bypassed with an impossible delicacy. This wasn't an animal. It was a ghost, a thief with skills that unnerved the former Alliance Marine. Tonight, the ghost's luck would run out. Cole didn't just set a trap, he built a cage. And what he caught was not something he could ever have prepared for. The lonely hum of the atmospheric processor was the only constant companion Cole Anderson had on Viridia. It was a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the composite floor of his prefab habitat, a steady heartbeat for a world that had none of its own. Outside, a perpetual twilight was cast by the planet's parent star, a distant red dwarf named Kepler 186f, painting the ochre dust plains in shades of bruised purple and faded crimson. Cole had been here for 3 standard years, carving out a solitary existence on a corporate claim licensed by Omnistellar Corporation. His job was simple: cultivate specialized bio-crops in his hydroponics bay, plants engineered to absorb the heavy metals unique to Viridian soil. Every 6 months, an Omnistellar freighter would land trade his harvest for supplies and credits, and leave him to his silence once more. It was a good life for a man who preferred the company of nutrient solution readouts to people. His past was a locked room, the key long since tossed into the void between star systems. Here there were no commanding officers, no ghosts of fallen comrades, just the honest work of his hands and the endless, silent plains. Until the thefts began. It started subtly. A single protein bar missing from a sealed crate. He'd chalked it up to a miscount. Then a week later, a whole sleeve of them. Then the nutrient paste. High-energy, mineral-rich stuff designed to keep a prospector going for days. The disappearances were clean surgical. No broken seals, no forced entry alarms. Just gone. The local fauna wasn't smart enough for this. The sand rats were scavengers, messy and destructive. The vulpacs, the 6-legged foxes, were cunning, but they couldn't override a maglock. Cole's military discipline kicked in. He ran a full diagnostic on the habitat's security systems. Everything came back green. He spent a cycle in the maintenance crawl space, checking for any hidden access points, any breaches in the habitat's integrity. Nothing. The thief was a phantom, and it was eating into his meticulously calculated survival margins. His next supply drop was 87 days away. Scarcity was a slow-acting poison, and paranoia was its first symptom. His frustration curdled into a cold, methodical anger. He would catch this thing. He spent 2 days modifying a cargo net, weaving microfilaments through the mesh that would deliver a non-lethal but ferociously powerful stun charge. He linked it to a network of laser tripwires he configured around the supply crates in the hydroponics bay, a place kept humid and warm, smelling of rich soil and growing things. He calibrated the sensors to ignore anything smaller than 20 kilograms. This wouldn't be triggered by a sand rat. Finally, he set up a live video feed to the small terminal beside his bunk, muted the habitat's internal alerts, and waited. For 3 nights, nothing. Cole sat in the dim light of his quarters, cleaning his old service pistol, a relic of a former life, the familiar weight of it, a grim comfort. He watched the static-laced feed, his eyes tracing the shadows of the broad green leaves of the xenocorn. On the 4th night, it happened. A flicker of movement on the screen. It was so fast, so fluid, he almost missed it. A slender silhouette slipped through a gap between 2 ventilation shafts he hadn't even realized was wide enough for a child to squeeze through. The figure moved with an unnatural grace, its feet making no sound on the grated floor. It was small, wiry, cloaked in what looked like stitched-together scraps of insulation fabric. Cole's breath caught in his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs, a hard, fast drumbeat against the low hum of the processor. The figure approached the crate he'd designated as bait. Slender, long-fingered hands reached out a flicker of pale skin in the green glow of the hydroponic lamps. It was working on the crate's lock, not forcing it, but manipulating it with a tool he couldn't quite see. Click. The crate popped open. The figure reached inside its movements, economical and sure. It was pulling out a pack of nutrient paste. Cole's finger hovered over the trigger switch for the trap. He watched as the thief tucked the package into a satchel, then reached for another. Greed. Good. He thumbed the activation switch. The screen flared white as the stun net deployed with a sharp hiss of compressed air. A high-pitched warbling cry, unlike any animal he'd ever heard, echoed through the habitat's audio pickup just before the stun charge hit. The figure convulsed and dropped, tangled in the shimmering mesh. Cole was on his feet in an instant, pistol in hand, his boots thudding down the short corridor to the bay. He slammed the palm of his hand against the door control, and it slid open with a pneumatic sigh. The air was thick with the smell of ozone from the discharged net. There on the floor, twitching feebly, was the thief. It was smaller than he'd thought. The hood of its cloak had fallen back, and Cole Anderson, the man who had faced down alien mercenaries in the Orion Spur and stared into the cold vacuum of space without flinching, felt his world tilt on its axis. The thief was a girl. Her hair was the color of spun moonlight, a shocking silver white against the grime on her face. Her skin had a faint, pearlescent sheen, and her ears were delicately pointed, tapering to a fine tip. But it was her eyes that seized him. They were wide with terror and pain, and they were a shade of impossible luminous violet. As he watched, a faint tracery of light, like bioluminescent filigree, pulsed weakly across her high cheekbones before fading. She was alien. He had lived on Viridia for 3 years, a planet certified by Omnistellar as possessing no sentient life. The official surveys, the geological reports, the biological scans, all of it, confirmed he was the sole thinking being for 1,000 light-years in any direction. And yet here was a girl, an alien girl caught in his trap, her strange, beautiful eyes locked on his, filled with a primal and soul-crushing fear. She let out another soft, chiming whimper, a sound that cut through his anger and suspicion, and found something he thought long dead. His hand holding the pistol wavered. The directive from Omnistellar was clear. Any undocumented, non-terrestrial sentient contact was to be contained and reported immediately. Lethal force was authorized. It was the law, a cold, practical rule for a cold, practical galaxy. But the law didn't account for the look in her eyes. It was a look of pure, unadulterated desperation. It wasn't the look of a common thief. It was the look of a cornered soul. The stun charge from the net was rated to incapacitate a 200-kilogram Grox bull for 10 minutes. The alien girl weighed maybe 40 kilos soaking wet. She was limp in the mesh, her breathing shallow, the violet of her eyes clouded with pain. Cole's first instinct, drilled into him by years of training, was to secure the threat. His second, a more rusted and neglected instinct, was to help. The conflict raged within him for a full 10 seconds before the latter won out. All right, easy now." He murmured the words, feeling clumsy and loud in the quiet bay. He holstered his pistol and knelt, his knee cracking in protest. With practiced fingers, he found the deactivation stud on the net's projector. The mesh went slack, its lethal shimmer fading. He carefully began to untangle her from the microfilaments, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle. Her cloak was rough, a patchwork of discarded thermal blankets, and what looked like ship insulation stitched together with metallic thread. As he worked, her eyes fluttered open again, the violet irises constricted, focusing on him. A low, guttural sound rumbled in her chest, a warning hiss that vibrated with fear. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin flickered again, this time a sharp, angry blue. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. It was pointless, he knew. She wouldn't understand the words, but maybe the tone would get through. He finally freed her arm and she immediately recoiled, scrambling backward until her back hit a row of hydroponic planters. She drew her knees to her chest, a small, terrified bundle of silver hair and wide, violet eyes. He could see her more clearly now. She was young, by human standards, maybe late teens. Her features were delicate elfin, with a high brow and a small, determined chin. Dirt smudged her cheek, but it couldn't hide the almost translucent quality of her skin. She wasn't just an alien. She was achingly, fragilely beautiful, and it made the whole situation feel 10 times worse. In her lap, she clutched the single packet of nutrient paste she had managed to grab. She held it like a holy relic. Cole slowly raised his hands, palms open, the universal gesture of peace, or so he hoped. "Look, I'm not security. I'm not Omni, Stella." She just stared, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her gaze flickered from his face to the nutrient paste in her hands, then back again. He realized she was trembling, a fine, high-frequency tremor that shook her entire frame. Shock, or maybe something else. He needed to build a bridge. Food. That's what this was all about. Slowly he stood up, moved to the crate she had opened, and took out another packet of nutrient paste. He then went to the small water reclamation unit at the end of the bay and filled a bulb with purified water. He walked back toward her, moving with deliberate, non-threatening slowness, and set the items on the floor about 2 meters from her feet. Then he backed away, giving her space. "For you," he said, pointing first at the food and water, then at her. Her eyes followed his gesture. She watched the items on the floor, then looked at him, a flicker of confusion warring with her fear. She didn't move, the standoff stretched, measured by the drip of condensation from a broad xenocorn leaf. Cole waited his patience, a skill honed by years of solitude. Finally, her gaze softened almost imperceptibly. She uncurled one hand from the packet she was holding and made a series of complex, fluid gestures. It was a language, graceful and intricate, but utterly incomprehensible to him. When she saw his blank expression, her face fell. The desperation returned more potent than before. Then she did something that stopped his heart. A single pearlescent tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek, and as it fell it glowed with a soft silver light before hitting the grated floor and vanishing. She pointed a trembling finger at the nutrient paste she held, then pointed at herself, and shook her head vehemently. A single choked sob escaped her lips. She then gestured toward the far wall of the habitat, toward the endless expanse of the Viridian plains, and repeated the gesture, a sweeping motion that spoke of distance of others. Not for me. The meaning hit him like a physical blow. The food wasn't for her. She was stealing for someone else. His carefully constructed anger, his righteous indignation over his stolen property crumbled into dust. He wasn't looking at a thief. He was looking at a provider, a desperate, terrified girl risking everything for whom he needed to communicate. He tapped his chest. "Cole," he repeated it. "Cole!" She watched his mouth, her head tilted. After a moment, she pointed a finger at her own chest. Her voice was soft, melodic like wind chimes. Lyra. Lyra, he repeated. The name felt strange and wonderful on his tongue. He pointed at the food again. For them. He made a gesture indicating multiple people, a group. She understood. She nodded frantically, the silver hair shimmering. More tears welled in her violet eyes. She pushed herself to her feet, her movement still unsteady. She took a hesitant step toward him, then another. She stopped just out of arm's reach, her eyes pleading. She held out the nutrient paste she had stolen, a silent offering, as if trying to bargain. Then she gestured again, an urgent beckoning motion. Come with me, see for yourself. Cole's mind raced. Omnistellar regulations were flashing in his brain like warning klaxons. Report, contain, await instructions. Breaking protocol could mean the forfeiture of his claim, hefty fines, even imprisonment. Omnistellar didn't like loose ends, and an undocumented sentient was the loosest end imaginable. They would send a corporate retrieval team. They wouldn't see a desperate girl. They would see a biological asset and xenospecimen to be dissected and studied in a sterile lab on some core world. The thought sent a jolt of ice through his veins. He looked from the regulation datapad on his wrist to the pleading, tear-streaked face of the girl named Lyra. He saw her trembling hands, the desperate hope in her eyes, and the ghost of 1,000 cold corporate directives. In that moment, he made a choice. He was no longer a cog in the Omnistellar machine. He was just a man. He gave her a short, sharp nod. Okay, Lyra. Show me. A wave of relief, so profound it was almost painful, washed over her features. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin glowed with a soft, warm gold. She turned and headed for the ventilation shaft she'd used to enter her steps, now filled with a desperate purpose. Cole grabbed a heavy-duty torch, his emergency medkit, and a rucksack he quickly filled with more nutrient-paste protein bars and water bulbs. Whatever was out there, they were going to need it. He followed her into the dark, unknown landscape of Viridia, the quiet hum of his habitat fading behind him. He was breaking every rule in the book, walking into a situation that screamed danger and complication. But for the first time in a very long time, Cole Anderson felt like he was doing something that truly mattered. The journey took them deep into the dust spires, a jagged formation of wind-carved rock that rose from the plains like the skeletal fingers of a buried giant. Viridia's single moon, a captured asteroid named Charon, cast long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed as they walked. The air grew cold, the thin atmosphere doing little to retain the day's meager warmth. Lyra moved with a silent, sure-footed confidence that belied her fragile appearance. She navigated the treacherous terrain, not by sight alone, but seemingly by some other sense, her head occasionally tilting, as if listening to a sound he couldn't hear. Cole followed the beam of his torch, cutting a swath through the darkness. He was a trained survivalist at home, in hostile environments, but this was different. He was following a complete unknown into an even greater one. His every sense was on high alert, his hand never far from the butt of his pistol. Yet his guide showed no fear of the dark or the strange nocturnal creatures that skittered among the rocks. Her only fear, it seemed, was of him falling behind. Every few minutes, she would glance back, her luminous eyes, a pair of violet beacons in the gloom, urging him onward. After nearly 2 hours of hard hiking, she led him into a narrow canyon, whose walls rose so high they nearly blotted out the star-dusted sky. The wind howled a mournful song through the rocks above. But down here, an unnerving silence prevailed. She stopped before a sheer rock face that looked no different from any other. Reaching out, she placed her palm flat against the stone. The bioluminescent patterns on her hand flared brightly, a brilliant cyan that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low grinding sound that seemed to come from the very bones of the planet, a section of the rock wall shimmered. The illusion of solid stone dissolved, replaced by a dark, gaping maw. It wasn't a cave. It was a doorway, a cloaking field more advanced than anything he had ever seen in the Alliance fleet, had been perfectly integrated with the natural rock. Lyra looked at him, her expression a mixture of hope and trepidation, and stepped through the threshold. Cole hesitated for a heartbeat, then followed her into the darkness. The air inside was stale cold and thick with the metallic scent of ozone and something else, something organic and faintly sweet like decaying blossoms. The doorway shimmered and solidified behind them, plunging them into absolute blackness. Before Cole could switch on his torch, a soft, ambient light began to fill the space. It emanated from the walls themselves, a gentle, silvery luminescence that revealed the true nature of their location. They were standing inside a starship. It was vast, far larger than the entrance suggested. The architecture was unlike anything human. It was all graceful curves and sweeping arches, more grown than built. The walls resembled polished, iridescent chitin, and the floor felt soft and slightly yielding under his boots. It was like standing in the nave of a great, silent cathedral. But it was a cathedral that had fallen from heaven. The ship was dead or close to it. Emergency lighting provided the only illumination. Sections of the curved walls were cracked and scorched. Inactive consoles and control surfaces were scattered like fallen tombstones. A fine layer of reddish viridian dust coated everything, a testament to how long it had been here. They had crashed, and they had crashed hard. Lyra led him deeper into the vessel, her small hand now gripping his worn jacket as if for reassurance. Her steps echoed in the profound silence. She took him through a massive chamber that might have been a bridge or a command center, its ceiling a great dark dome that probably once showed the stars. Now it was just a void. Finally they reached a cavernous hall, and Cole saw them. Rows upon rows of crystalline pods lined the walls, stretching into the gloom. Each pod was about 2 meters long, shaped like a teardrop, and held a single occupant. They were Lyra's people, the Xylans. They floated in a clear, gelatinous fluid, their silver hair swirling around their serene faces. They were all ages, from wizened elders with faces like carved ivory to children no bigger than his arm. A silent, sleeping city of refugees. But something was terribly wrong. Above each pod was a small, glowing crystal. Most glowed with a steady blue-white light, but scattered throughout the rows, some were flickering erratically. And worse, a significant number were dark, their occupants floating in shadow. Cole's blood ran cold. These weren't sleeping. They were in stasis, and the stasis was failing. Lyra pulled him toward a smaller alcove set apart from the others. Here there were only 2 pods. One was empty hers. The other held a child, a small Xylan boy, who looked like a miniature version of Lyra. His face was peaceful, his silver hair a halo in the stasis fluid. But the crystal above his pod was flickering violently, shifting from blue to a sickly, alarming red. A low, discordant hum emanated from it, a sound of profound, mechanical distress. Lyra placed her hand on the crystalline surface of the pod, her face a mask of anguish. The bioluminescent patterns on her own skin pulsed with a frantic, desperate rhythm. Cale. She whispered the name, a pained breath. She looked at Cole, her violet eyes swimming with unshed tears. She pointed from the flickering red crystal to the nutrient paste in her satchel, then back again. The pieces slammed into place in Cole's mind with the force of a physical impact. The food. She wasn't just feeding them. The bioengineered crops he grew were designed to absorb and process specific heavy metals and exotic particles from Viridia's soil. The nutrient paste was a concentrate of those unique organic compounds. She wasn't using it as food. She was using it as medicine or fuel, a temporary fix to stop the stasis pods from failing. He looked from the dying child in the pod to the exhausted, heartbroken girl beside him. He looked at the silent city of sleepers, an entire civilization balanced on a knife's edge. The weight of it all pressed down on him, the sheer, staggering scale of the tragedy. He had been angry about a few stolen protein bars while a whole people was quietly dying in the dark, hidden beneath the very ground he walked on. The shame was a bitter metallic taste in his mouth. He knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "I understand," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I understand. We need to help him. We need to help all of them." For the first time since he'd met her, Lyra didn't flinch from his touch. She leaned into it, and a single shuddering sob broke the cathedral-like silence of the ghost ship. With a new shared purpose, they moved to the ship's bridge. It was a wreck, but a single console flickered with defiant life. Lyra's fingers danced across the crystalline interface, and a holographic display shimmered into existence above it. It was a star chart, alien and yet familiar. A red sun dominated the display, a star Cole recognized from his own charts, Gliese 581, a red dwarf in the Libra constellation. Lyra touched the star, and it flared a violent, angry red on the display, before collapsing into a white dwarf. Her people were refugees. Their star had died, or was in the process of dying. With the help of the ship's limited translation software, a stilted robotic voice began to fill the silence, narrating the images that flashed across the screen. The great light faded. The home world withered. We, the children of Xylos, began the long sleep hour arc, the star dreamer set on a generation's journey to a new sun. The display showed their ship, a beautiful organic vessel that looked like a great Nautilus shell sailing through the void. It showed a system they had targeted, a yellow G-type star with a promising-looking water world, but they never made it. Cosmic dust, impact, primary drive failure, navigation systems damaged. We were adrift, lost. The holographic ship tumbled through space, alarms flashing silently. Then a new signal appeared on the screen. A beacon, a weak but clear life-sustaining signal from an uncharted system. A beacon that led them here to Kepler 186f, to Viridia. Hope. A false hope. The signal was a lie, an echo of a long-dead probe. Cole felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew the probe, the Magellan 4, an early-generation omnistellar survey probe. It had crash-landed on Viridia over a century ago. Its power core would have leaked radiation for decades, creating a false biosignature that mimicked a life-sustaining planet. His company Omnistellar had led them into a trap. The display showed the Star Dreamer entering Viridia's atmosphere. The damaged ship couldn't handle the entry. It showed the violent crash, the catastrophic damage. The last command of the ship's captain was to divert all remaining power to the stasis hall to preserve the sleepers. A final desperate act to save his people. "Why is the stasis failing now?" Cole asked, speaking toward the console's audio pickup. Lyra typed a query. The robotic voice answered. "The stasis fields require a precise energy frequency. Viridia's atmosphere contains a high concentration of tetrion particles, a byproduct of planetary mining operations. These particles create quantum interference, destabilizing the stasis matrix. The field decays. Without intervention, total failure is inevitable. Mining operations, His mining operations, the biocrops he grew, were part of Omnistella's advanced terraforming and resource extraction initiative. They were designed to leach heavy metals from the ground, but the process released trace elements and radioactive isotopes into the atmosphere. Tetrian particles. He was the source of the poison that was killing them. The food he grew was the only thing that could temporarily counteract it. The console displayed a complex chemical equation. It was a molecular diagram showing how a specific protein chain, found only in his bioengineered xenocorn, could be used to synthesize a temporary shielding compound. The formula, written in a language of elegant alien script, resolved itself into something his own datapad could partially translate. It looked something like the nutrient paste was a crude, inefficient delivery system, but it contained just enough of the critical protein to slow the decay. Lyra had been using it to patch the failing pods, a desperate form of triage, starting with the youngest and weakest, like her brother Kale. The full weight of the situation crushed him. He had come to Viridia to escape the ghosts of his past, to live a quiet life. But he hadn't found peace. He'd found a graveyard of his own making. His work, his very existence on this planet, was the instrument of a slow, silent genocide. "How long?" Cole asked, his voice hoarse. "At this rate, how long do they have?" Lyra's hands trembled as she keyed in the command. The display shifted. The stasis hall appeared as a grid of blue lights. One by one, lights began to flicker and turn red, then black. A timeline appeared at the bottom of the screen. Estimated time until 90% stasis failure, 38 standard days. 38 days. His next supply shipment wasn't for 87. He didn't have enough food, not even close. And the paste was only a stopgap, a bandage on a hemorrhaging wound. Is there a permanent solution? Cole pressed a desperate hope flaring in his chest. Can the ship be repaired? The translator hummed. The primary stasis generator requires a full system reboot. This necessitates a stable power source. The ship's main reactor is fractured. Auxiliary power is failing. An external power source compatible with a Mark IV energy converter is required to initiate the reboot sequence. A Mark IV energy converter. Cole knew what that was. A standard piece of industrial equipment. Heavy-duty reliable. Omnistella used them on all their frontier outposts. And there was only one place to get one on Viridia. The place he'd spent 3 years avoiding. The bustling, corporate-controlled settlement of Prospector's Landing, over 200 kilometers to the north. It was the only other sign of human life on the entire planet. A place crawling with Omnistella security corporate bureaucrats and roughneck miners who wouldn't hesitate to shoot a claim jumper on sight. Stealing from his own pantry was one thing. Stealing a half-ton piece of high-tech equipment from a fortified corporate outpost was a suicide mission. He looked at the flickering red light above Kyle's pod. He looked at Lyra's face, etched with a sorrow too profound for her years. He looked at the countdown timer on the screen, 37 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes. There was no choice. Not really. His quiet life was over. He had inadvertently become their poison. Now he would have to become their cure. Okay. Cole said the word avow. Okay. We're going to Prospector's Landing. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. Cole spent the next 2 days in a fever of activity, a man possessed. He and Lyra became a strange, unspoken team. He would work, and she would watch her violet eyes, absorbing his every move, a silent partner in their desperate conspiracy. First, he brought his rover, a rugged, 6-wheeled vehicle, designed for Viridia's harsh terrain, into the hidden starship. The cloaking field allowed the entire vehicle to pass through the rock face, a bizarre sensation, like driving through a static waterfall. Inside the ship, he began to modify it. He stripped out non-essential components, sample storage, geological scanners to make room for the Mark IV converter, which was bulky and heavy. He reinforced the suspension and overclocked the rover's power cell, knowing they would need speed more than longevity. Lyra, in turn, worked with the ship's systems. She managed to bring a small fabricator online. Using the last dregs of auxiliary power, they began to process the xenocorn and nutrient paste he had brought. She showed him how the fabricator could refine the raw material, extracting the essential protein, and creating a far more potent, concentrated version of the stasis stabilizer. A single dose of the shimmering, viscous liquid was more effective than 10 packs of the paste. They worked in shifts, Cole tinkering with the rover's engine, Lyra managing the delicate process of refining the life-saving compound. A fragile trust grew between them. They communicated through a mixture of gestures, the ship's clumsy translator, and a growing intuitive understanding. He learned that her people communicated not just with words, but with the shifting colors of the bioluminescent patterns on their skin. Gold was understanding and gratitude. Blue was anxiety. Red was fear or danger. He found himself watching the soft light on her face as much as he listened to the translator. He also learned the heartbreaking truth of her solitude. When the ship crashed, the stasis system for the command crew, including her parents, had failed catastrophically. She and Kyle were the only two survivors who were placed in the secondary stasis hall, which had held out longer. A failsafe had awoken her when the energy fluctuations reached a critical level a few months ago. She had woken up alone, the last conscious member of her entire race, with the weight of their survival on her slender shoulders. She'd been scavenging ever since learning about his habitat from a distance, figuring out its systems, and making her desperate nightly raids. The story settled in Cole's chest like a lead weight. He had felt alone on Viridia, but his was a chosen solitude. Hers was an absolute, crushing isolation he could barely comprehend. "The converter," Cole said one evening, pointing at a schematic he had sketched on a datapad. "It will be in the main power depot at Prospector's Landing. That's the most secure part of the settlement." He brought up a satellite map of the outpost. It was a standard omnistellar setup, a cluster of prefab structures surrounded by a high-energy fence with watchtowers and automated sentry guns at regular intervals. "Getting in is the easy part," he explained, tracing a route along a storm culvert that ran beneath the perimeter fence. "I used to run maintenance checks on these things. There's an access grate here," he pointed, "that has a faulty mag lock. I can bypass it. The hard part is the depot itself. It's guarded. Human guards, not just drones. And the converter is registered. The moment we remove it from its housing, it will trigger a silent alarm to the main security hub." Lyra's skin flickered with anxious blue light. She typed a question into the console. "Can you stop the alarm?" "No," Cole said grimly. "But I can delay it. The security grid reboots every 12 hours for a diagnostic cycle. The whole system goes offline for exactly 90 seconds. That's our window. We get in, rig the converter for transport, and pull it out during the reboot. 90 seconds to disconnect it and load it onto the rover before the system comes back online and screams bloody murder." It was a sliver of a chance. So many things could go wrong. A patrol could be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The reboot schedule could have changed. The faulty grate could have been fixed. He looked over at her. "It's a big risk." She looked from him to the schematic, then back to the stasis hall where her brother and her people slept. Her expression hardened with a resolve that seemed to add years to her face. The light on her skin shifted to a steady, determined gold. She typed a single, decisive response. "We take the risk. The night of the heist, a fierce dust storm kicked up a stroke of luck, that would help cover their approach. They drove the modified rover across the plains, the world outside a maelstrom of red dust and screaming wind. Cole was dressed in his old Alliance Marine fatigues, the dark grey fabric blending with the twilight gloom. He'd given Lyra a spare set of dark coveralls, which were far too big for her, but would help her blend in. As they neared Prospector's Landing, the settlement appeared out of the storm like a phantom, its perimeter lights diffuse halos in the swirling dust. Cole parked the rover in the shadow of a large rock outcropping about a kilometre away. "Stay here," he said, checking the charge on his multi-tool. "Keep the engine warm. When you see the main perimeter lights flicker, that's the reboot. It means I'm inside and the clock is ticking. You have 10 minutes from that point to get to the depot's loading bay. Not a second sooner." Lyra nodded, her violet eyes wide in the dim light of the rover's cabin. She reached out and for the first time initiated contact herself, her small, cool fingers briefly touching the back of his hand. It was a gesture of trust, of solidarity. "Be safe." The message was as clear as if she had spoken it aloud. Cole gave her a tight, reassuring nod. He didn't feel pulled his goggles down over his eyes and slipped out into the raging storm. The wind tore at him, stinging his face with fine grains of sand. He was no longer just a farmer. He was an infiltrator, a thief, a soldier fighting a war no one else knew existed. And he was racing against a 90-second clock to save a world. The storm was his ally. It masked his sound, and the swirling dust played havoc with the settlement's optical sensors. Cole moved in a low crouch, using the knowledge of the terrain he'd gleaned from years of studying survey maps. He found the storm culvert exactly where he remembered it. The grate was heavy, but the mag lock was indeed faulty. The multi-tool whined for a few seconds, the lock clicked open, and he slipped into the dark, echoing tunnel. The air inside was stale, smelling of rust and recycled water. He moved quickly, his boots splashing in the shallow runoff. He counted the maintenance junctions, finally stopping beneath a specific grate. According to the schematics, this would bring him up inside a utility corridor, right behind the main power depot. He checked his chronometer. 20 minutes until the system reboot. He worked the grate open and cautiously poked his head out. The corridor was empty, lit by stark, humming fluorescent lights. He pulled himself up silent as a wraith and sealed the grate behind him. The depot was just around the corner. He could hear the low, powerful hum of energy conduits. Peeking around the edge, he saw 2 Omnistellar guards in standard corporate armor rifles, held in a low, ready position. They were complaining about the storm and the extra patrol duty. He ducked back, his heart pounding. He couldn't take them both on without making noise. He needed a diversion. His eyes scanned the corridor. Emergency systems panel. An idea sparked. A dangerous, risky idea. He crept to the panel and prized it open with his multi-tool. Inside was a tangle of wires and conduits. He located the circuit for the local fire suppression system. Overriding it would douse the corridor in foam and trigger a localized alarm that would draw the guards away from their post. It would also put the entire section on high alert, but if he timed it with the reboot, the confusion might give him the cover he needed. 5 minutes to reboot. He began splicing the wires. His hands, though steady, felt slick with sweat. He was no saboteur, but he remembered enough from his demolition training to be dangerous. His chronometer beeped softly. 1 minute. He took a deep breath. He connected the final wire. The fire alarm blared hideously loud in the confined space. Red lights began to flash. "What the hell?" one of the guards yelled. "Probably the dust getting into the sensors again. Come on, we have to check it out." He heard their heavy boots jogging down the corridor away from the depot. Cole moved. He sprinted into the depot, a cavernous room filled with transformers and power converters, humming with contained energy. There it was, a brand new Mark IV, sitting on a charging cradle ready for deployment. His chronometer read 30 seconds to reboot. He got to work his multi-tool flying as he uncoupled the primary power links and the diagnostic clamps. The housing was heavy and awkward. 20 seconds. The main perimeter lights outside flickered and died. The reboot had started. The 90-second clock was ticking. He heard the roar of an engine. Lyra. Perfect timing. He slapped the final release on the converter's housing. It was free. The loading bay door was right there. He hit the emergency release, and the heavy door began to slide upwards with a groan. Outside, the rover was waiting, its flatbed angled perfectly. Lyra was in the driver's seat, her small frame barely visible over the console, her face pale with tension. "The winch!" he yelled over the wind. A heavy magnetic winch cable shot out from the rover, and Cole slapped the clamp onto the converter. "Take it up." The winch strained, and the heavy Mark IV unit began to slide out of the depot and onto the rover's bed. It was agonizingly slow. 40 seconds gone. He scrambled onto the flatbed, working to secure the unit as it settled into place. 55 seconds. Suddenly, a voice boomed from behind him. "Anderson, what in the goddamn hell do you think you're doing?" Cole froze. Standing in the depot doorway was Director Thornton, the settlement's chief administrator. A thin, weaselly man with cold eyes and a perpetually smug expression. He wasn't alone. The two guards were with him, rifles raised. "It's not what it looks like," Cole grunted, trying to buy time. 65 seconds. "It looks like you're stealing 250,000 credits worth of Omnistellar property, you treasonous hermit," Thornton snarled. "And you've got, what is that? An undocumented Xeno. Oh, the board is going to love this." His eyes glinted with greedy ambition. An alien discovery would mean a massive promotion. 75 seconds. The depot's internal lights flickered back on. The reboot was ending. "Lyra, go now!" Cole roared. The rover's engine screamed, but before it could lurch forward, Thornton raised a pistol. He wasn't aiming at Cole. He was aiming at Lyra. "Stop, or I'll put a hole through your pet," he commanded. Everything slowed down. Cole saw the smug look on Thornton's face, the fear in Lyra's eyes, the unwavering aim of the guards' rifles. They were trapped. 85 seconds. Any moment now, the alarm for the missing converter would shriek across the entire outpost. In that split second, Lyra did something unexpected. Her hands flew across a small, unfamiliar console she had integrated into the rover's dashboard, a piece of her own ship's technology. She hit a switch. It wasn't a weapon. A high-frequency pulse erupted from the rover, invisible and silent. On the depot's main control panel, every light suddenly flashed red. Consoles sparked. A massive power surge feedback targeted and precise shot through the settlement's newly rebooted grid. Alarms began to blare everywhere at once. Fire suppression, atmospheric leaks, containment, breaches, all false positives. The guards' comms erupted with panicked, contradictory orders. It was chaos. The 90-second window had closed, but Lyra had just kicked the door wide open again. In the confusion, Cole acted. He launched himself off the flatbed, not at Thornton, but at a massive coolant pipe running along the wall. He wrenched the emergency valve. A huge cloud of pressurized nitrogen vapor erupted into the room, obscuring everything in a freezing white fog. "Go!" he screamed again. He heard the rover's tires spin on the concrete, then the crunch of it speeding away into the storm. He fired his pistol at the overhead lights, plunging the immediate area into darkness, and then scrambled back out into the maelstrom. Thornton was shouting orders, but they were lost in the cacophony of alarms and the howling wind. Cole ran, following the rover's fading tail lights, into the red desert, the alarms of Prospector's Landing, a furious, impotent chorus behind him. They had the converter. but they had been seen. Thornton knew his name, and he had seen Lyra. They hadn't just stolen a piece of equipment. They had declared war. The journey back was a frantic, high-speed race against a dawn that was still hours away. The storm began to subside, leaving behind a sky unnervingly clear and filled with stars. Every shadow seemed to hold the threat of an omnistellar patrol skimmer. Cole pushed the rover to its limits, the engine whining in protest. Beside him, Lyra scanned the horizon, her skin pulsing with a steady, anxious blue. They reached the hidden canyon just as the first hints of light from Kepler 108f began to stain the eastern sky. They guided the rover into the Star Dreamer, the cloaking field shimmering shut behind them, sealing them in their sanctuary. They were safe for now, but there was no time for relief. They immediately set to work, the adrenaline of the chase fueling them. Cole used the ship's anti-grav lifters, sluggish from low power, but functional, to move the Mark IV converter into the engineering bay next to the ship's fractured main reactor. The air hummed with a new energy, a new hope. Lyra guided him, pointing to connection ports and energy conduits that Cole, with his human engineering knowledge, could understand. He worked connecting the converter to the ship's primary systems. It was like performing open-heart surgery on a god. The technology was ancient, alien, and breathtakingly advanced. Lyra, meanwhile, was at a console, preparing the stasis generator for the power surge, her slender fingers a blur across the controls. Finally, it was ready. "All right," Cole said, his voice echoing in the vast engineering bay. "This is it." Lyra looked at him and nodded, the golden light of hope blooming on her cheeks. She initiated the sequence. Cole threw the master switch on the Mark IV. The converter spun to life with a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the floor. Power, clean and stable, surged into the dormant veins of the Xylan starship. Lights flickered on all around them. Not the dim emergency lights, but the bright, clean illumination of a fully powered vessel. The ship seemed to take a deep, shuddering breath. On the console, a progress bar filled rapidly. "Stasis generator reboot in progress." They ran back to the stasis hall. The discordant, sickly hum of the failing pods was being replaced by a single, pure harmonic tone. The flickering red lights above the pods stabilized, turning a brilliant, healthy blue one by one. Cole's eyes immediately found Cale's pod. The angry red light wavered, then solidified into a steady, life-sustaining blue. Lyra let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pressed both hands to the glass of her brother's pod, her whole body shaking with relief. Their celebration was cut short by a jarring boom that shook the entire ship. A proximity alert flashed on a newly awakened wall monitor. It showed the canyon outside. 3 omnistellar assault skimmers were descending, their landing struts deploying. At the front of the group stood Director Thornton, his face contorted with rage, a squad of heavily armed corporate soldiers fanning out behind him. "They found us!" Cole breathed, his blood running cold. The converter must have had a hidden tracker. He drew his pistol. It felt pitifully inadequate. "Lyra, get back. Stay behind me." But Lyra wasn't retreating. She was looking at the monitor, then at the now fully powered bridge console. An idea was forming in her eyes, a look of fierce, defiant intelligence. She shook her head. "No." The translator spoke her own voice, now patched through the system, clear and melodic. "Fighting is not the way." She raced to the bridge. Cole followed, confused. "What are you doing? They'll breach the hull in minutes." "The ship's main comms array is online," she said, her hands flying across the console. "Their weapons can break this ship, but they cannot break the truth." Outside, Thornton's voice boomed through a loudspeaker, amplified and distorted by the canyon walls. "Cole Anderson, you are in violation of corporate mandate. 734. Surrender the asset and the stolen property, and you may be granted leniency. Instead of surrendering, Lyra activated the ship's holographic projector. Not the small one on the bridge, but the massive ship-wide emitter designed for external communication. A giant shimmering image of Lyra, 10 stories tall, flickered into existence above the canyon, her silver hair seeming to catch the light of the rising sun. Her violet eyes filled not with fear, but with profound sorrow, and resolve looked down upon the omnistellar forces. And then she broadcast everything. The ship's log, the death of her star, the false beacon, the crash, the slow, creeping death caused by the Tetrian particles from Omnistellar's own operations. She broadcast the scientific data. The stasis decay rates the chemical formula for the stabilizer, made from Cole's own crops. She sent it all out on an open, wide-beam frequency, hijacking Prospector's Landing's entire comms network. Every colonist, every miner, every bureaucrat in the settlement was seeing it, hearing it. Cole stood on the bridge watching the tactical display. He could see the soldiers below hesitate. They looked up at the giant, ethereal girl, and then back at their director. Thornton screamed in fury. "It's a trick, a fabrication. Open fire, destroy that projector." A few soldiers raised their rifles, but none fired. They had heard the truth. They were miners and engineers, not conquerors. They lived on this planet, breathed this air. They were complicit. And then a new voice cut through the comms. It was a grizzled old prospector from the settlement. "Hold your fire, Director. I think we need to hear a little more about this." Another voice joined in, and then another. The colonists of Prospector's Landing were turning against their corporate master. Thornton stood alone, his authority evaporating in the crimson morning light. His war was lost, not by weapons, but by a story. Defeated, he ordered his men back to the skimmers. They retreated, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. Cole walked over to Lyra, who was looking out the main view screen at the retreating skimmers. The giant hologram faded, leaving just the girl her people saved her home, now humming with life. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with awe. "You saved them." "No," she said, turning to him, the golden light of gratitude shining on her skin. "We did." He looked out at the red plains of Viridia. It was no longer just his solitary refuge. It was a sanctuary, a new home for the last children of Xylos. The future was uncertain. Omnistellar would not take this defeat lying down. But for the first time, they were not alone. Cole Anderson, the hermit, had found a cause. He had found a family. And in the heart of a silent, dying ship, humanity, in the form of one stubborn, broken man, had chosen compassion over protocol, and in doing so, had given a lost people a new dawn. So what happens when a hardened recluse, a man running from his own ghosts, is confronted with a truth that shatters his entire world? Cole Anderson thought he was just catching a thief, but he ended up finding his own humanity. The story of Cole and Lyra isn't just about spaceships and aliens. It's about how one person's choice to listen, to empathize, can change the fate of a civilization. It reminds us that our actions, even the ones we think are insignificant, can have ripples we never imagined. And that sometimes the greatest strength isn't found in a weapon, but in the courage to stand up for someone who has no one left to fight for them. If this story of unexpected connection and the quiet triumph of the human heart resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good sci-fi drama, and subscribe for more stories that explore the vast unknown galaxies and the even more vast territory of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.